the first day of the week when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight.
Add to your faith virtue, to your virtue knowledge, to your knowledge self-control, to your self-control patience, to your patience godliness, to your godliness brotherly kindness, to your brotherly kindness add love.
The definition of faith, Hebrews chapter 11 defines faith for us, and it gives us examples of faith. And every single example that we have of faith is coupled with obedience.
I've heard before a connection in terms of mercy and grace. I think those two things are tied together. Mercy is God withholding what we do deserve. But when God is gracious, he's giving us what we do not deserve. And
Christians need to be mindful of that. You may have to sacrifice in order to have to obey God.
We need context, right? When we talk about authority in the scriptures and understanding the scriptures, we always have to talk about context.
It was a profound saying from Genesis 2. But what he was saying is it was really a shadow of the relationship of Christians and Christ, the church and Christ himself. Notice in verse 13 of Acts chapter 8, right? Even Simon believed and was baptized.
Simon Sorcerer is a really good example of this because it's very clear when you read Acts chapter 8 that Simon was saved. Nowhere does he say, I'm going to build my churches. Sometimes it's really hard, but you just can't quit. You got to keep going. And that's what Christianity is all about, is to keep going.
And the New Testament is that by which we will be judged. Now these were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word of God with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to find out if these things were so. Join us as we look into the inspired text of King Jesus with the same desire and approach to discover the will of God with Berean spirits. Welcome back to Berean Spirits. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist with the Southside Church of Christ here in Springfield, Missouri, and all the guys are back with us. We've got Craig Benny, who is with the Lake of the Ozarks Church of Christ. Craig, how you doing today?
I think I'm back to peachy. Thank you.
That's great. That's great. We got Richard Dotson with the Kearney Church of Christ up north of Kansas City. Richard, how you doing?
Doing well. Thinking about 9/11 this weekend and
yes, sir.
Remembering what evil does and what we can do to defend ourselves. And that's through preaching the gospel.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, it's going to be a somber weekend for sure as we look back and remember and excuse me, and move forward. So, man, Josh Thornhill with the Brookmead Church of Christ in Johnson City, Tennessee. How you doing, Josh?
I'm here.
Yeah. Well, That's good. Yeah, well, I guess we could all be a little bit more joyful, though. I mean, come on. I mean, Craig is the one. Craig's peachy. Other than that, Josh is just here. I'm just here. Well, I'm doing great.
That's what he says every week. He's just here.
Yeah.
You know. So he's here. I guess we're happy, right?
Yeah. He's on the green side of the grass. That's for sure. You
sound like you're hesitating there, but I'm glad you're here, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not crazy about that shirt you got on, that Indianapolis Colts. Man, I'm telling you, first Tennessee, which won their game, by the way. You wore Tennessee last week, and now you're wearing the Colts.
Killed this week.
Yeah, well, they knew they were going to win, at least that one game of the season.
I mean, that's the one game they had the hope of winning. So
yeah,
they've got two others that they are supposed to win. Well, three, because Vanderbilt. I mean, they lost to the local ETSU here and had one of the funniest plays of the weekend. But anyway.
Okay. Oh, man. Well, let's move on to something important.
You mean football's not important?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
In the SEC, it's a religion down there.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Tennessee
false
football
religion,
isn't
that's for
important,
sure.
That's for sure.
yeah, yeah. Well, we're here to convert them. So, man, and hey, this is something they need to hear. Do not grow weary in well doing. That's what our subject of the day is. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Because as Josh so well knows, as a Tennessee fan, it is hard not to grow weary, right?
You're missing the second
yeah.
half of the verse, though. They have to do well.
Well, he tries to pump them up. He tries to do good for them, but
So we've become weary because they don't do well.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. So we've got a couple of passages. This is a text that really is found in more than one place. We've got Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 13. And in these particular texts, even within the context, not only do you have the folks who are engaged in teaching there, Galatians 6, for example, begins by talking about helping a brother who has fallen into a trespass, and then doing good to others around you, especially those of the household of faith. And in 2 Thessalonians, you've got a text that is trying to encourage folks to remain faithful to God. While it talks a little bit about church discipline, it talks about those who are working and laboring for the Lord, and it's difficult when those around you who are caught up in other things, worldly things. When you're striving so hard for the Lord, sometimes not to grow weary in doing what is right, especially when the world is against you, when everything else seems to be going against you. And there's a few reasons for that, and I think we'll get into that as we get into the program. But Craig, this is something that I think from earlier conversations has been kind of on your mind a little bit. So if you want to kind of start us off on maybe some things you've got in mind when it comes to this particular thought.
Yeah, I mean, I have several thoughts when it comes to this particular thought, but sometimes we get. I think maybe the mindset as preachers as well, the four of us, it's hard to see what everybody else is doing, and it's hard to see what's going on in the background sometimes, and we get to thinking that we're the only ones doing things, and we get to thinking that that we're higher and better than we are, and everybody else is kind of slacking, and it's kind of discouraging sometimes. And so you'd mentioned not growing weary, even though the world is against us. I would say, even though sometimes it seems like the world is against us, and sometimes it seems like our families are against us, and sometimes it seems like the brethren are against us. The point of the passage in Galatians is even no matter what happens, do not become weary, do not become tired of doing what is good. And the reason for it is that you will reap what you sow. So if this case, if we put in the work, if we are constantly looking for what is best for others, we're constantly looking for what is best for God, the reward is so much higher than we can even anticipate. Paul says that it hasn't even entered into the minds of men the glory that is that is prepared for us, and so we can't even think of it. We can't even think about how great the reward is. But I figure the direction we'll probably go in is just sometimes the things that are around us, it feels like you're drowning, and then somebody steals your life vest, and it just seems like it's getting worse and worse and worse. And sometimes there's a reason for that, and God's pushing you towards something, or keeping you away from something.
Yeah. Well, Craig, real quick on that particular text, I mean, one of the things we talk about growing weary, but first of all, it implies that first of all, you're doing good, right?
Yeah, I mean, all joking aside to Tennessee football, but that is part of the text. You growing weary because you're doing good. I think about was it Elijah who after he
Defeated the prophets of
I was
Baal.
gonna say, I don't. What's the calm way? What's the internet polite way of saying completely massacred 500 prophets? Um,
Yeah.
but anyways, defeated the prophets of Baal is a good way of putting that. He's scared for his life, and he goes and hides in a cave. And God comes to him. He's like, "What are you doing?" And he said, I've done all these good things, and I'm the only one serving you, the only one here. And he even got to the point where he thought it would be best for him to die. And God told him, get up and eat. Get up and eat and go back to work. And so there's a lot of people who are growing weary, but they're not doing good. But doing good sometimes does make you weary.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's 1 Kings 19.
Yeah.
Right. And Josh, and if you want to speak to this a little bit, because a lot of times while we'll get into reasons why people grow weary, I mean, just to hit on one, it immediately is the lack of instant gratification, right? That's what people want today. They want instant gratification. When we're doing something good, we want that pat on the back. We want people to acknowledge what we're doing and appreciate what we're doing. And when that's not happening, it kind of speeds up that tiredness, that weariness of what we're doing. But yeah, I think we forget that, our gratification really comes from God.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially as preachers, because I'm sure we're all aware. One thing, and this is even something that's bothered me this week, we see the worldliness of our brethren a lot. And Paul says in 2 Corinthians 11, when he talks about all the things he suffered as a child of God, as a preacher, as an apostle, he says one of the things that he says, even beyond all of that, he says, my deep concern for all the churches daily. Paul was grieved by what he saw at a lot of these congregations. Like if you read through the book of Corinth and you see all the problems, that bothers Paul, and it upsets him to see them acting that way. And that's why he writes these letters to encourage them to change. And preachers today are the very same way. I mean, the reason preachers preach is because they have a message that they want to share with the world. And we see our brethren, our own brethren, who are supposed to be, our battle buddies, who are supposed to be in the fight with us, who just seem to not really care about spiritual things. And they don't really seem to want to devote themselves to the Lord. And we preach and preach and preach till we're blue in the face and we see no result. And again, going back to that idea of the instant gratification, we don't see those immediate results, and so we grow weary. But I've been told all my life, people just don't change. I mean, that's just a sad reality. People just are not going to change. But if we're doing what's right, and if we're preaching the gospel, and if we're doing good, we have no reason to be discouraged or to be weary, because as Paul says, he has a reward waiting for him. He's fought the good fight, he's finished the race, and he's kept the faith. And he says, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, because he did what's right and he didn't grow weary in doing good. It gets frustrating. It makes you want to rip your hair out sometimes. You just want to go home and cry some Sundays or some Wednesdays or something. But you just have to keep going. You have to keep pressing on, and you just can't quit.
Yeah. And people can change. I mean, it's difficult, and a lot of people don't want to, but they can. Otherwise, there would be no point in preaching. I mean, that would be like a,
And I think that's the point, though.
Yeah.
I think that's the point, though. People do what they want to do, and too often people don't want to change. People don't want to be more spiritual. They don't want to be more holy, and so they don't change. They're just complacent in their worldliness, and as preachers, we see the damage that's doing to their soul and the jeopardy they're placing themselves. But they're complacent in their worldliness, and as long as that's what they want, until they want spirituality, until they want to be holy. I mean, we could preach till we're blue in the face, and it's just not going to change.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
I think a lot of the times, I'm sorry,
No,
a
go
lot
ahead.
of the times we get to, as preachers, it's discouraging to us because we see the issues, and we see the issues because people talk to us about the issues, and because we've based our whole life around the church and the work of the church, and so it's easier to spot. I think a lot of times people don't change because they don't realize they need to change. They become so desensitized to the sermon, to the preaching, and they in their minds they hear it and they say, yeah, those people need to change, but they don't realize it's them. And I guess that's a problem we also have, where we become desensitized and we need to realize it's us. But that, kind of skipping ahead, that the idea of, to don't grow weary. A lot of times we want to place blame on the members or blame on ourselves, but it's really just a mindset. It's becoming desensitized to what is preached, and maybe we need to wake up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Jeremiah, for example, at one point was ready. He also, a lot of the prophets, I mean, they were just ready to quit at certain times. And, but as Jeremiah pointed out, that he had this fire burning within him that he just could not keep from preaching and teaching. But it goes beyond that. I mean, sometimes, we could talk about works of hospitality. We could talk about, all kinds of various things that people do as God's children to glorify God. And, and when it's not appreciated or it's not wanted by others, it's not seen as good things by others. I mean, there's lots of reasons why folks kind of grow weary of doing that, especially when, I think about Jesus confronting Saul of Tarsus. It's difficult for you to kick against the pricks, he says. So, why are you fighting against me? And that's what we run into. So many people seem to be fighting against us, and it is easier to see the faults of others before we see our own faults. But that's where self-examination has to come in. Richard, when you think about this idea of growing weary in well-doing, I mean, you've had some experiences you've conveyed on the program before, about, showing up and just wondering, why you're there, because you're the only one there. And then just when you need it most, here comes somebody, needing the gospel.
It's because we lack vision. We don't have God's vision. God knows things. Going back to what Craig said about Elijah, he didn't realize there were 7,000 people who had not bowed their knee to Baal. And so, that's why the Lord's saying, what are you doing here? The Lord has vision. He knows things. He sees these things, and our vision is limited. And so, yes, we have to realize that. And when the game's over, the Lord will call us out of the pool. But until that time, we're got to work and realize that we can't see the things the Lord sees. We don't know the things the Lord knows. So we're going to have to obey and put our faith in the Lord and trust that his word is going to accomplish exactly what he said it was going to do. It would not return unto him void. And so that's why we preach. I understand growing weary. I think we all do, but we can also, you guys pointed out Elijah and Jeremiah. You can point out Moses as well when he struck the rock twice and asking for the water to come out. that's an occasion where he was frustrated with the people, and we can't allow that to take place. We have to keep on keeping on, as Josh said, and believe in the Lord. If I preach the gospel to some church that has, I don't know, let's say one person shows up. If I preach the gospel to one person, well, then that's what the Lord wanted to hear that day, I guess. If I preach it to 200 people, well, then that's what the Lord wanted. That's the Lord's will. And he's going to put me where he wants me to be. So, we're going to have our faith in God and not grow weary in well doing. But it all comes down to faith. Do we really believe in what we're doing? And let me go one step farther. We're looking at this from the preacher standpoint. That's what we've talked about it a lot. But I was at a church one time, and it was in Tennessee, where I was the first one there, and I was preaching for them that day, and I'd never been to that church before. But I was sitting in the far back of when I go to a church I haven't been there, I usually park in the back. People have places where they like to park, and so I try to stay out of the way. Kind of like their pews, you never know if you're going to be sitting in somebody's pew, but it's silly. But I was sitting back there. I don't even know if this woman saw me, but she's the first one of the church, member of the church, that shows up, and she parks in her spot. And it took her at least 10 minutes to be able to get out of the car. And then, leaning heavily on the car, she rolls to the back of the vehicle. And I mean, leaning on it hard until she can open the hatch and pull out a walker. And then she has to assemble it. And it was taking some effort. But by the time everything was done, it took her 15 minutes to get to the door of the church building. And I thought to myself, boy, I can be in the church building from where I was parked, I don't know, 20 seconds. And it took her 15 minutes just to get out of her car. And she was parked in a handicap spot. Now, you would think it would be easy for her to grow weary in well-doing, but there she was. She came to church. And I remember thinking, boy, she doesn't realize the lesson she preached to the preacher that day, who was just sitting back watching, because that was a powerful lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, you were just sitting back watching.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Give her a hand with her walker.
I know it. Exactly. That's what I'm thinking.
I'm from Missouri. It's a show me state. She had to show me something.
Oh my goodness. No, but but you're right. I mean, that shows the dedication of people, members, that show up all the time. And I think about 2 Peter chapter 3, where, the first few verses there are brethren, folks who are complaining, if the Lord hasn't come back now, he's not going to, where is the promise of his coming? They say. And Peter says, they willfully forget that, by the power of the word, God created this world. By the same word, he flooded it. And by the same word, he has preserved it for the day of judgment and perdition. And so, and he goes on in verse 8 to talk about 1,000 years as a day, and a day is as a 1,000 years. And then his long suffering in verse 9. But the point being, I think, it kind of reminded me from what Richard was saying, is that sometimes we do forget. We forget about the power of the gospel. We forget about God's timing. We forget about God's promises, and we lose focus upon him, and it causes us then to begin to kind of grow weary in the things that we are doing when we lose focus upon God in his promises, in his time. And I think that's important for us. Very quickly, before we move on, I do want to tell folks that about our website. We have BereanSpirits.com. find out more about the works that we are involved in. And of course, if you have comments that you want to make during the live stream, you can do that and join the conversation. Occasionally, we get some folks who want to make some comments. Usually, they're awesome comments that go well with our conversation. And of course, we love to hear where you are listening from. So if you want to leave that as well, we appreciate that also. And so, Richard, if any of that comes in, you can jump in anytime with any of that. But if there is nothing there, then let's go to Josh. And in some of the things that I have said, I can tell already. I can hear it in your voice, in your breathing, Josh. You're just chomping at the bit to jump in with some things that have been said.
Yeah, he's chomping all right.
Yeah. He's not fast, but he's chomping.
Go ahead, Josh. Don't let me interrupt you. Hey, I don't want to make you weary.
And yet here we are.
I know.
I think one of the keys to not growing weary is to make sure that we continue to live with hope. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, let me go ahead and pull this up real quick so that way I can quote it. But in the latter part of 2 Corinthians 4 and into chapter 5, Paul says, "We do not lose heart, grow weary, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles," that's perspective right there, by the way. Our light and momentary troubles. They're achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary and what is unseen is eternal. And then he continues on in the 5th chapter to talk about our earthly tent we live in. Even if this tent is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. And I think that's part of why we get so frustrated as preachers and as Christians when we are trying to do what's right, and we're trying to be everything that God wants us to be, and then we just see those around us that don't seem to care. We need to continually remind ourselves that we're not doing it for us, and we're not doing it to see the rewards around us. We're doing it because there's a reward in heaven. There's a home that's waiting for us. Meanwhile, we groan longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling. And that's why it's so important that we do not grow weary. It's so important that we keep pressing on, that we keep moving forward, because we're striving for an eternal crown. We're striving for that heavenly home. Like we talked about, I think it was last week or sometime recently, Hebrews 11 verses 13 through 16, where it talks about the patriarchs, how they dwelt in the land of promise, and they could have returned if they wanted to, but they pressed forward because they desired a heavenly country. We need to live with that hope, and we need to constantly keep that hope ever present in our minds, because we're looking forward to what God has in store for us, and that helps to, I guess, ease the burden of the things that we're facing currently throughout this life.
To that point, when you go to Ephesians 5, Colossians 3, I think, 1 Peter chapter 2, and several other passages that talk about various relationships, slave master, worker, employer, husband, wife. But it talks about laboring as to the Lord. And I think that goes to the point that you're making as well, that when we're doing something, remember that our blessings come from God. And I think that will help us to understand that, maybe it's not appreciated. Maybe it's not recognized or even wanted by those around us, the things that we are engaged in, the good works and things that we are doing. But remember, we are laboring as to the Lord. Craig?
Well, can I jump in?
Yeah.
Sorry, Craig.
Go ahead.
But I was going to actually speak before Chris spoke, but he jumped in, so I'm gonna jump in now. So, anyway, this hope thing that
Go ahead and
Josh
jump in then.
I the hope. I really think Josh has his finger on the button when we're talking about hope. I mentioned it Sunday in my lesson. Uh, we got a couple of guys at church that have show cars. You know, you real nice car, hot rod, whatever you take to the car shows, and they brought them to church a few times. They're really neat cars, and they're you know they don't just become neat. You got to put a lot of work into them, and I use this as an example. I said if this one brother brought his show car to church, and I pulled my old truck in next to him, and I just opened the truck door, hit the side of his show car, put a dent or scratched it up, you know, he's going to be more than irritated. I mean, he's really going to be upset. But now let's put that in perspective. Let's say as soon as that happened, Jesus was in the parking lot and he told that brother, he said, hey, he goes, you got 5 minutes. Go inside and say goodbye to everybody at church. We're going to heaven. You're going with me. We're going up there. Well, that brother would not care what happened to that car. He wouldn't have any care at all about it. He'd be thinking about, I'm going to heaven, and he's going to be saying his final goodbyes, and that's what he's going to be focused on. And that's the problem, I think, as Josh said. But if we focus more on hope and think about the reality of it, that as we did a show on being pilgrims. If we focus on being the pilgrim as we pass through this world and focus on hope, then that's going to help us not grow weary. I used that example last week when we were talking about pilgrims, of the pilgrims themselves making that passage. And I'm sure there was times they grew weary. I mean, you know, the seasickness they had to endure, the chores they had to do during storms with the waves, I'm sure. And I kept saying how important it was, you know, for the captain probably take people to the bow of that boat every once in a while and keep reminding them, look, out on the horizon, one of these days you're going to see land out there. It's going to happen. And it's so important that Christians can do that for one another. If we can keep reminding each other about heaven, that one of these days, this is going to happen. And it is going to happen. I'm not just, you know, telling you a fairy tale. It is going to happen. But if we can convey that message enough, then perhaps that will help people not to grow weary in well doing.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
that's a
Craig.
great point. So Craig, I'm going to come back to you this time. But if there was one thought, if you had to leave everyone with one final thought on this particular subject to really drive it home and to help folks not to grow weary, what would it be?
God knows what he's doing. Trust the Lord.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of the church in Thessalonica, kind of goes off of what Josh was saying a minute ago. The church of Thessalonica was remembered by Paul for three things. He said, you become an example to all who believe. He says, I remember without ceasing in my prayers, remember you without ceasing in my prayers because of your work in the faith, your labor of love, and your patience and hope. Well, the idea of patience is long suffering, right? It's literally not growing weary while suffering. So it's kind of what we're talking about. They have patience because of the hope that is within them. Everything that we're going through in this world, God has told us that we're going to go through that. Every single part of it. Jesus said that he didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. He came to set mother-in-law against daughter-in-law and father-in-law against son-in-law and brother against brother and sister against sister. He did not come to bring peace, the kind of peace that we think of anyways. He did not come to bring peace into our lives. He came to bring truth, and he knew that the truth would set us apart. And so he warned us that our relationships in this world would be strained. He warned us that we're going to suffer persecution. Paul told Timothy, anyone who desires to live godly in Christ will suffer persecution. He told his disciples that they will persecute you because they hate me. He said, if they hate me and you're going and speaking in my name, what makes you think that they're going to love you? And so when he sent them out on the limited commission, and so he tells them, you're going to suffer. People are going to hate you. Your family is going to be set against you. The world is going to persecute you for my name's sake. Brethren are not going to listen to you. There's going to come a time when men will not endure sound doctrine. God warned us about all of this. But he also said, humble yourself and do it my way. Do what I told you to do, and you will inherit eternal life.
Yeah.
And so God knew this was coming. God told you he could handle it. And so trust in God. Have patience because of the hope that is in you.
That's a great point. Great point. Josh, some last thoughts?
In the garden in Matthew 26, it says Jesus was sorrowful. I mean, and you see weariness there. It might not actually use the word weary, but I think you can see weariness there in Jesus as he's anticipating the death that he's about to die. And think about where we'd be if he became weary and gave up. We'd be lost without hope. But he didn't grow weary to the point of giving up. He went and did the will of the Father. And he gave himself to die for us so that we could have redemption, so that we could have eternal life, so that we could dwell with him for eternity. And if God was willing to do all that for us, how much more should we be willing to devote our whole life to him and push through the occasions where we might become discouraged or weary to continue to do the will of God. Just keep going. Just keep going. Keep pressing forward so that we can lay hold of the crown of life which has been prepared for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Richard?
Well, I think our good friend John Mundy has made a comment. I'm going to let him have my final word. He says, thanks, brothers. One thing that helps me when I'm tempted to get discouraged is to remember the great purpose that I'm a part of. As a Christian, member of the church, I am in the activities of my life, demonstrating the manifold wisdom of God to heavenly beings. And he has Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10 through 13 as a reference. If no one on earth agrees with me, if I hit a wall every which way I turn, no one can take away from me the eternal purpose of God that I'm a part of. Paul says, therefore, I ask that you do not lose heart at my trials. I believe he said trials and tribulations. So, needless to say, John, appreciate the comment. And let's not grow weary. Let's keep on sawing wood, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, think about it. That's a good, we should have used Noah as an example. Boy, I mean, he was told to make a boat on dry land. Well, you think he wasn't heckled? I mean, think about that. It hadn't even rained before Noah had built that ark. So, you know, boy, I bet he grew weary. I mean, I would think so. That's an awfully big project. And then having to, you know, deal with the animals.
Yeah.
And then he had to get the other animals on the boat. Besides, you know, that's a joke. I was going to make reference to his family, but
well, you know, yeah. Again, talking from experience, I understand, Richard. You're good. Yeah. All right. Well, folks, we do appreciate everybody tuning in to Berean Spirits. We're here every Thursday morning, Lord willing, at 10 a.m. And you can go to bereanspirits.com, find out more about some of the works that we are engaged in, and some of the other things that we do both online and with the local churches that we are involved in. And so be sure and leave a comment. Let us know where you're listening from. We do appreciate that so very much. And remember to search the scriptures daily with Berean Spirits.
Thank you for watching Berean Spirits.